Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Plymouth State University. My name is Ayla Steer. I am the student body president, and I am speaking behalf on the student body. So tonight tonight is part of the speaker series. All of the presidential candidates are invited to speak on campus because of the primary elections, and it's a great thing to have for our students and our community. So now I'm introducing Connor Brown.
How's everybody doing tonight? I am privileged to introduce Carly Fiorina, a Republican presidential candidate. But first, I'd like to say again, my name is Connor Brown. I'm the president of the Plymouth State University Republicans on campus. And we have a unique role on campus. As a philosophical minority and a statistical minority, we have an uphill climb. But we know that Republican values, conservative values, should be the ones that young people are embracing for a better economic tomorrow. And that's Carly Fiorina's message, the ability to rise up and to be better, and that the best days are not behind us, but are in fact in front of us. The first time that we had met Carly Fiorina and saw her speak was at the Conservative Political Action Conference last March. And this was a really telling time for a lot of us because this was the first time that we saw national candidates on a big stage talking to hundreds of people. And that room was electric when she was talking. And collectively, the 7 of us that were there after she finished speaking, we all kind of looked at each other and said, wow, this is not only an inspirational person, but somebody that's going to compete not only in New Hampshire, but hopefully on the national stage. So with that said, we're going to be doing a town hall style meeting. Carly will be speaking and then answering questions. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and we'll have an auxiliary microphone available for you to ask questions. We please ask that everybody maintain respectful and conduct themselves in a demeanor that is not only respectful to the school, but also our candidate that is visiting with us tonight. With that said, I would like to introduce you, Republican presidential candidate, Carly Fiorina.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here at Plymouth and be with all of you. I want to ask the students in the room a question. How many of you are medieval history or philosophy majors? Oh, well, there's one of your professors. He taught medieval history and philosophy right here for 40 years. Okay, so I start with that because all is not lost. I was a medieval history and philosophy major in college. There you go. Okay, you heard it here. I start with that for all the students in the room because I can remember, even though it was a long time ago, I can remember being in college and I can remember being very uncertain about my future. And in fact, I graduated from college with that degree in medieval history and philosophy. I was completely unemployable. And so I went off to law school. That's what a lot of young people did in the 70s. I graduated in the middle of a deep recession. I hated law school, and I quit after less than a semester. I had not been a quitter in my life. My parents were pretty concerned and disappointed, and I had to make a living. And being a young woman in the 70s in the middle of a recession, there actually weren't all that many opportunities. And so I went back to work doing full-time what I had done part-time to put myself through school. When I was in college, I was a temporary secretary for a lot of local businesses. I typed and filed and answered phones, and I was pretty good at that. So I answered an ad in the want ads. We don't have those anymore, but in any event, I looked in the newspaper, found a job, accepted the first one I was given, and was hired full-time to type and answer the phones and file paperwork for a 9-person real estate firm. After about 6 months on that job, 2 men who actually had founded the company, this little 9-person firm, it went on to become a big, huge real estate brokerage company across the country called Marcus & Millichap. But they came up to my desk and they said, you know, we've been watching you and we think you could do more than type and file. Do you want to know what we do? That was my introduction to business. They got me interested in business. But of course, more importantly than that, they saw possibilities in me. And because they saw possibilities and potential in me, I saw different possibilities for myself. It's actually what every single one of us needs at least one point in our life, maybe more than one point in our life. We need somebody to take a chance on us. We need somebody to see possibilities in us. Earlier today, I was at Katy Community. Yes, all you great Katy people. And I reflected, we lost our younger daughter to the demons of addiction. And I reflected as I met with the staff and the young people at Katy that in addition to everything else that Katy does to focus on drug prevention, Katy also takes a chance on people. Katy gives people a helping hand when they need it. Now I want to tell you a story from very far away. I want to tell you a story about some people I met in January of this year. Before I launched my presidential campaign, I was the chairman of two major charities in this country. One is called Good 360, and we take excess inventory from corporations, and there is a lot, and instead of it ending up in landfills, we distribute it to 45,000 charities in this country. The inventory could be anything from technology to t-shirts to shoes to books to toys. The other is called Opportunity International. I have stepped down from both of those positions since I launched my campaign, but Opportunity International is the largest microfinance organization in the world. We've lent $8 billion roughly, $150 at a time. And we've lifted millions of people out of poverty. And so in January, as the chairman of Opportunity International, I went to New Delhi to hold a board meeting. But I also wanted to visit with our clients. And so I traveled to the slums of New Delhi. I don't know if you've ever been to the slums of New Delhi, but they're pretty grim places. Mountains of trash, marauding animals, sewage in the streets, people piled on top of each other. And as I climbed this little rickety ladder to get up to the roof to meet with these clients, I actually expected to see desperation in their eyes, the desperation that reflected their circumstances. And yet it's not what I saw. I saw determination. I saw focus. I saw hope. I saw pride. Because despite their circumstances, we had done more than give them a $150 loan. We'd done more than give them tools and training and support, although we had done all those things. We had taken a chance on them. We had given them the helping hand. And most importantly of all, we'd said, you have possibilities. You can make something of your life. I've traveled and lived and worked all over the world. And I know that it is true that everyone has potential. Everyone has God-given gifts. That's what my mother taught me when I was a little girl, and it's true. And the truth is, people have far more potential than they realize. And everyone, even those who feel the least gifted, and I was one of those young women who didn't feel very gifted, we all have gifts. So it's worth asking, why is it that more things have been more possible for more people from more places here than anywhere else on earth? I think it's possible because our founders built a nation on an amazing idea. It was unique in the world then, and it is unique in the world still. And the idea was that here you had a right to fulfill your potential, to find and use your God-given gifts. Our founders expressed it as the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But what they meant was you had the right to fulfill your potential. Now, we're not a perfect nation, and we've had to work really hard to make sure that that right applies to everyone. But despite our imperfections, despite the struggles of our history, there is no doubt that more things have been more possible for more people here. And our founders coupled this idea that you have a right to fulfill your potential, they coupled that idea with something that was really radical and is also unique. They said that that right comes from God. and cannot be taken away by man or government. In fact, our Constitution was written as much to curb the abuse of power, to prevent the abuse of power, as it was to protect our rights. I'm running for the presidency of the United States because I think we've reached a pivotal point. I think we've reached a point where, honestly, the possibilities for too many Americans, in fact, the potential of this nation is being crushed by a government that has grown so big, so powerful, so costly, so complicated, so inept, and so corrupt, and a professional political class that won't do anything about it. Now, in this regard, Bernie Sanders and I agree, and I know there's some Bernie Sanders supporters here. I agree that we have crony capitalism in government. And you know why? Because when you have a big, powerful, costly, complicated government, only the big, the powerful, the wealthy, and the well-connected can deal with it. And our government has gotten bigger and more expensive and more inept and more corrupt for 50 years under Republicans and Democrats alike. There's only one trouble. Bernie Sanders is dead wrong about how to fix it. You see, Bernie Sanders' answer is more government. And what happens when you have more government, more spending, more complexity, you get more power in the hands of government and the big, the powerful, the wealthy, and the well-connected. So in truth, as government gets bigger, income inequality gets worse. As government gets bigger, the poor get poorer, the middle class get crushed, and the rich get richer. And that's what we've seen happen. You know, Republicans and Democrats differ a lot on our core philosophies. But whether you're a Democrat, an independent, or a Republican, the American people have seemed to come to agreement on two very basic things. 75% of the American people now believe the federal government is corrupt. I agree with them. 82% of the American people now think we have a professional political class of both parties that cares more about its own power, position, and privilege than on actually changing anything. I agree with them as well. And it's not because all public servants or all politicians are bad people, not at all. In fact, we have a lot of people in public service who are fine people. Jeannie Forrester as one example, who endorsed me early on. She is a public servant. You see, leaders understand that it's about service. But the truth is, we have so many politicians who have been in the political system for so long, they don't see it for what it is anymore. It reminds me of the difference between management and leadership. You see, managers are people who do the best they can within the existing system. We all know a lot of managers. There are managers in student body life, there are managers in business, there are managers in politics. Managers are people who go along to get along. It's not that they're bad people. It's that they just don't ever challenge the system. Not really. They don't ever really challenge the status quo. And unless you challenge a system or challenge the status quo, you don't ever really fix it. You just kind of tinker around the edges of it. Leadership is altogether different. Leaders understand their job is to challenge the status quo. Their job is to fix what's broken. And that means you're not going to be able to go along to get along with everybody. You're actually going to have to solve a problem. I think leadership is what's needed now in Washington, D.C. And I think leadership is needed around the world. I think this election is about leadership. The leadership necessary to actually cut government down to size and hold it accountable, something that hasn't been done by Republicans or Democrats for 50 years. We have a 73,000-page tax code. We don't know where our money's being spent. We have regulations. We don't even know what they are anymore. Every single agency of government has gotten bigger and bigger for 50 years. So we need some real shaking of the status quo. I believe we need to go to zero-based budgeting. What is that? It's a fancy word for how you budget at home. It means basically every dollar has to be examined, any dollar can be cut, and any dollar can be moved. And the only way we're going to spend less overall as a country and yet invest in those things that need investing in is to go to zero-based budgeting. Instead of a 73,000-page tax code, we need a 3-page tax code. Why 3? Because 3 is what most people can understand without professional help. 73,000 pages, only the wealthy can understand that, or the big, or the well-connected. We need to have a system where actually there's consequence for non-performance in the federal government. There is no consequence today. So, we learned the other day that the Veterans Administration handed out $140 million worth of bonuses, and meanwhile 307,000 veterans have died before they ever received health care. And we have been talking about reforming the VA for 25 years, just like we've been talking about securing the border and a million things. It's a lack of leadership. I cannot close my comments tonight before I take your questions without commenting on Paris. Because what's going on in the world is also a lack of leadership. How disappointing that President Hollande and Prime Minister David Cameron both spoke more clearly about the threats than our own president did. How disappointing, how infuriating, actually, that our own president sat on national television on Friday morning, hours before a terrorist attack unfolded, to say that ISIS was contained. How infuriating that still Mrs. Clinton and President Obama cannot call this evil what it is. I know most of our Middle Eastern allies. I know most of our European allies. I've spent a lot of time in both of those regions in the world. I've also chaired the advisory board for the CIA. I've held the highest clearances available to a civilian. I've advised 2 secretaries of defense, a secretary of Homeland Security, a secretary of state, the CIA, and the NSA. And I can tell you with all that experience, when the United States does not lead, the world is a far more dangerous and troubled place. And we must wage this war. Now, I don't mean by sending 10,000 boots on the ground. You see, that's the false choice that President Obama always presents to the American people. He says, if you don't agree with what I'm not doing, the only thing we can do is send our young men off to war. It's not true. It's not true. The truth is that when Hillary Clinton and President Obama declared victory in Iraq and withdrew all of our troops against all military advice to the contrary and for political expediency only, they gave ISIS the opportunity to conquer vast swaths of territory and take over our weaponry besides. The truth is we have allies who are fighting ISIS on the ground as we speak, now joined by the French and the German and the British. But they need to see leadership and support and resolve from the United States of America. They have asked us for very specific things, whether it's weaponry or bombs and materiel or intelligence sharing or a more concerted air campaign. None of those requests have been answered. I will answer them all. Because you see, when the United States does not lead, our allies lose courage and our adversaries press forward. I will close by saying this, and I'll take any questions you have. I think there's a lot of confusion about what leadership is. Leadership is not about how big your office is, or how big your title is, or how big your airplane is. It's certainly not about how big your ego is. Leadership is about service. And actually, we need leadership now that is serving the American people. One of my great heroes is Margaret Thatcher. And Margaret Thatcher once said to her fellow countrymen and women at a pivotal time in that nation's history, "I am not content to manage the decline of a great nation." Well, ladies and gentlemen, neither am I. And I think we have been managing the decline of this great nation for far too long. You see, the highest calling of leadership is to unlock potential in others. The highest calling of a leader is to see and seize possibilities. The highest calling of a leader is to understand that it is not their job to go along to get along. It is their job to challenge the status quo and solve problems, festering problems, whether here at home or around the world. I am not content to manage the decline of a great nation either, but I am prepared, with your support, with your prayers, with your votes, to lead the resurgence of a great nation. This is, for all our imperfections, the greatest nation the world has ever known. And this must always be a nation where every American's life is filled with possibilities and where we lead in the world. Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, sir. And then I will come to you. Yes, go ahead.
My question, I think everybody can hear me.
We'll come just in case.
The first thing, the biggest problem this country is dealing with at the present time is our huge debt, and that needs to be dealt with. But with that said, I'd like to know what your policy is going to be on the space program and space exploration.
So you're right. Our debt is a huge problem, and it's particularly a huge problem for the young people sitting in this room because it is their debt more than it's yours and mine. How is it? So we're now $18 trillion worth of debt. That's what we have. Ask yourself this question. How is it possible that the United States government spends more money each and every year and has done so for 50 years, and yet we never have enough money to do the important things? Have you ever noticed that? No matter what the issue is, everybody says we need more money. So if you say we really do need to invest in space exploration, by the way, yes, we do. Why do we? Because the Chinese are, the Russians are, the Japanese are. Space is an important frontier. We need to lead there, but we don't have enough money, supposedly. Or if your issue is we need to secure the border, we don't have enough money. I'd like my questions answered on tax day. Remember when the IRS told us this year, we don't have enough money to man the 800 thing, 800 phone banks? We never have enough money, and yet we spend more money each and every year. How is that possible? It is because all the money is spoken for. This is why we have to go to zero-based budgeting, because all the money that we spend, do you know how an appropriations hearing happens in Washington, D.C. today? You don't ever talk about the whole budget. No. You don't ever examine the whole budget. No. All you talk about is the rate of increase over last year's budget. And if any of you have ever done business with the federal government, and I have in my years in technology and communications, you know that in the last 6 to 8 weeks of every fiscal year, what happens? If you're contracting with the federal government, hold out your money bag because they're spending money like crazy, whether they need to or not. Why? Because they don't ever want to be asked the question, can you do it with less? We must go to zero-based budgeting so we can examine every dollar, cut every dollar, move any dollar. The only way you reduce debt and deficits is to reduce spending, grow the economy. Reduce spending, grow the economy. The good news is, if we reduce spending in the right way, we can grow the economy. Example, I mentioned a 73,000-page tax code. So complicated, nobody can understand it anymore without hiring armies of accountants and lawyers. And so its very complexity benefits the wealthy, the big, the powerful. Anybody who can hire all those armies of lawyers and accountants is benefited. It has to go to about 3. But guess what? If we take a 73,000-page tax code and put it to 3, not only do we help lift a burden off of all those small businesses who are the main job creators in this nation, small businesses like the one I started out in, create 2/3 of the new jobs, they employ half the people. We're crushing them. Not only do we lift the burden of that complicated tax scheme off of small businesses, but what else do we do? You need a whole lot less IRS agents. If all you have is a 3-page tax code, and on this day, in this period of time when we are all so sensitive to the dangers that surround us, do you know that we have more IRS agents than we have CIA and FBI combined? Wow. So we have to reduce spending, and we have to grow the economy. And if we reduce spending in the right way, we will grow the economy. And then you can prioritize. You can prioritize. We must have the strongest military on the face of the planet, and everybody has to know it. We must invest there. That includes, by the way, leading in new technologies like space technology. But you can't prioritize and you can't invest if all the money is spoken for. One last point on this. Would it surprise you if I told you that there's a bill to go to zero-based budgeting sitting on the House floor? There is. It's not getting voted on. There's a bill. There has been a plan to go to a 3-page tax code around for 20 years. See, nobody wants to challenge the status quo. So I'm going to ask you for your help. As your president, I'm going to ask you for your help. I want to get that zero-based budgeting bill passed finally. And you know how we get things passed in Congress? We put pressure on the political process. And you know how I'm going to ask you to put pressure on the political process? I'm going to ask every single one of you to take out your smartphones. Take them out, and I will ask you a question. The president has a weekly radio address. I'm going to go into the Oval Office, and in my weekly radio address, I will say, please take out your smartphones. Do you agree with me that we should go to zero-based budgeting? Do you think Congress ought to pass that bill? Press 1 for yes. Press 2 for no. There actually is an app for this. This technology exists. If you have a flip phone, you can't play, so you need to upgrade. But the point is, we can get this done, but it needs the kind of leadership in the Oval Office that is not afraid to challenge the system, and you as citizens will have to help me. Yes, sir. Whatever you like. I can hear you, but make sure everybody else can hear you.
Hi. As president, what would you do to make American energy cheaper, cleaner, and more reliable?
Great question. So first, we must be the global energy powerhouse of the 21st century. We must be. Why? Because we have the resources, because we have the capacity, because we have the technology, because we have the know-how, and oh, by the way, it'll be a lot better for the environment. Now, if we are the global energy powerhouse of the 21st century, here's what happens. First of all, we create millions of jobs. Second of all, we export our resources around the world. Picture this situation. Today, Iran can now export its oil. Russia exports oil. Venezuela exports oil. OPEC exports oil. At least two of those people I just mentioned, Iran and Russia, are clearly adversaries. The oil that they export is heavy, sour, dirty crude. American producers produce light, sweet, cleaner burning crude. It's better for the environment. American producers are prevented from exporting by law. But Iran and Russia are going along exporting. So now, does that make any sense? We have Iran and Russia, who are enemies, gaining money and power around the world by exporting energy that is dirtier burning than the energy that we could export from this nation, which would be cleaner, better for the environment, and create jobs. One of the things that people say, and you know, we have a global warming climate change conference going on in Turkey today with the nations of the G20, and I know that young people are very concerned about the environment, as you should be. I am too. We have to preserve our planet. The problem is most people don't ever read the fine print of the science. The fine print of the science, all the scientists who tell us that global warming and climate change is man-made also tell us this. A single nation acting alone can make no difference at all. In fact, to make a difference with current technology will require a 30-year effort, globally coordinated and costing trillions of dollars. There is no chance that's going to happen, folks. China has not agreed to shut down a single coal-fired power plant. They're building 4 new ones every single week. So while we're in Turkey having a conference, the reality is nothing's changing. The only thing that changes intractable problems is innovation. So in addition to being the global energy powerhouse of the 21st century because we'll create jobs, in addition to being the global energy powerhouse of the 21st century because we will take power away from the bad guys, in addition to being the global energy powerhouse of the 21st century because it's better for the environment, we need to be the global energy powerhouse of the 21st century so that we have industries strong enough to innovate. When we weaken our own industries, there is no one else more innovative than this nation. There is no one more technologically sophisticated than this nation. And so when we begin to wound ourselves, as this administration is doing through its regulation, we are curbing our ability to innovate, not just on behalf of our own citizens, but on behalf of the world. The last thing that I would say on this is it is easy to say coal is bad, just as one example, coal is bad, let's shut coal down. That's what President Obama is doing. That's what the EPA regulations are doing. The Clean Power Plan that the EPA just rolled back will make energy more expensive for middle-class families. It's easy to say that, but then consider for a moment that our coal plants are far cleaner than the Chinese coal plants. And travel someday if you think that the environment is more important than people's livelihood. Travel someday to some of these communities in Kentucky or West Virginia and look at what 40% unemployment looks like. Look at the devastation that it wreaks in communities, in drug abuse, in family abuse. People need to work. And when we take people's jobs away, not at the altar of science, but at the altar of ideology, which is what this is, it's a tragedy for them and for our nation. Yes, ma'am. Yes, The Moral Cause for Fossil Fuels. I've read that book, actually.
I bought it for my husband. He loved it. I'm now reading it. I think every college student today should read that book. My question to you is, why can't the government protect our personal information?
Why can't the government protect our personal information? You know, I used a word in my remarks that was pretty strong. I talked about ineptitude. Ineptitude. That's the answer. Sadly, that is the answer. Look, I've spent a lot of my life around bureaucracies, cutting them down to size, holding them accountable. I can tell you what happens if you give a bureaucracy more money year after year, and there is no consequence for non-performance. I'm now describing the federal government, ladies and gentlemen. More money every year, no consequence for non-performance. What you're going to get over time is ineptitude. Ineptitude. So let's just talk about what happened in the Office of Personnel Management, okay? Here's what happened, and I know this, having, as I say, chaired the advisory board at the Central Intelligence Agency. We have known that the Chinese were trying to hack into our most sensitive government databases and systems. We've known that for 12 years. This is not a surprise. We've known it. And so we should have been preparing for it. In fact, the Office of Personnel Management had 2 warnings by their own Inspector General about major gaping holes in their security, and they just didn't fix them. If you went and looked at the Office of Personnel Management, they didn't even have the most basic 2-step authentication processes in place that everybody in the private sector does. It's called ineptitude. It's why bureaucracies have to be cut down to size. It's why, in addition to zero-based budgeting, so we know where all the money is and you can assign metrics, are you meeting metrics or not? If you're not, you don't get the money anymore. We have to tackle the seniority system and move to a system of consequence. By the way, I mentioned that citizens can be helpful to me. Let me tell you why I know that works. Do you remember the VA scandal, the wait times in Arizona? Remember that? And everybody was so outraged, and the American citizens put huge pressure on the government, said, this is terrible. We can't have veterans dying before they get an appointment, and we can't have bureaucrats cooking the books so they cover it up, which is what was happening. So the American people were so outraged, they flooded Congress with phone calls and emails and all the rest, and guess what? Congress acted. In 3 weeks, they passed a bill, a bipartisan bill, that said you could fire the top 400 senior executives at the VA. We need to apply that all throughout government. By the way, less than a handful have been fired. But the point is, pressure works. So I'm going to use technology to apply pressure to the political process over and over and over again. Ineptitude. Now, what we need to do, we need to stand up. What I would do is stand up a central command for cybersecurity, because technology is a tool, for sure, that I can use to re-engage citizens in government, but it's a weapon that's being used against us over and over and over. We are the most technologically sophisticated nation in the world. China cannot beat us if we get our act together, but we got to get our act together. And the only way we're going to do that is to cut this bureaucracy down to size, hold it accountable, which is why we need a different kind of leadership in the Oval Office. Yes, ma'am. Yep.
I'd I'd like to ask you about your role as one of the 2 female presidential candidates who are running for arguably the most powerful position in our government. You have the unique opportunity to be a positive and influential role to young women across the country. How would you explain to them that if you were president, you would limit their access to reproductive health services by supporting the defunding of Planned Parenthood, an organization that provides low-cost reproductive health care and a plethora of additional health resources?
So, I find it interesting that people are so unaware that Planned Parenthood actually offers less health services than either community health centers or pregnancy centers, both of which Hillary Clinton and most Democrats refuse to have funded by taxpayers. So I don't really think this is about women's health, actually. And I also believe that most people, whether they're pro-life or pro-choice, understand that we cannot have a taxpayer-funded organization engaging in changing abortion techniques or late-term abortion techniques for the purposes of harvesting body parts. We can't have that. And that's not about being pro-choice or pro-life. Yes, ma'am, you had a question in the back. Did you have a question? If you don't, it's okay. I'll go on.
As a future educator, I'm concerned about the reduction of teacher salaries. How are you planning to ensure that teachers receive adequate pay and that the amount does not decrease any further?
Yeah. I think the right way to start that question is to say, because it's easy to say, oh, government should fix that. In particular, the federal government should fix that. But in truth, I think what ails our education system is too much federal government in too many things. So let me try and make that case for you. The funding for the Department of Education has increased for the last 40 years, and the quality of our education has gone down. Many young people are concerned about skyrocketing student debt. You should be. The student loan debt problem has increased by 50% under President Obama. Do you know why? Most people don't know that buried in the pages of the Affordable Care Act is the takeover of the student loan industry by the federal government. The student loan industry is now controlled by the federal government, something most people don't know when they're taking out a loan. And the federal government now determines the interest you're going to pay on that loan. And generally, the rate is somewhere between 4.5% and 6.5%. Meanwhile, the government pays interest on its debt at somewhere between 1.5% and 2.5%. In other words, the government's making money off of you. If it sounds like a racket, it's because it is. And instead of having a competitive industry where people actually have to compete for your business, you're captured by the federal government. I come from the technology industry, and you love technology as do all your peers, and so you know what you've come to expect from the technology industry. You've come to expect better prices, better feature function year after year after year. Why? Because it's the most competitive, least regulated industry in the world. That's why. Competition works. Not only does the federal government tell you what you're going to pay for your student loan and permit no competition for your business, which does not serve you, but serves the government, not only have they done that, but think about the role the government has played over the years as the Department of Education has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, they go through expensive regulations and certification processes on universities. Ask any university administrator and they will tell you that the requirements the federal government imposes on them have an impact on cost. Not only that, the federal government, particularly under this administration, has worked hard to get rid of choices. So they're trying to put for-profit universities out of business. They're trying to say everyone should go get a 4-year college degree. Not everyone should. Student loans ought to be available for technical 2-year degrees, for example. But the federal government actually says what kind of education a student loan can be applied to. And they add cost in regulatory and certification requirements. And finally, of course, there's Common Core. You know, Common Core, however it started, Common Core has turned into a bureaucratic program to teach teachers how to teach and students how to learn. And it's not working. So I say all of that to say that in general, we need the federal government less involved in education. That doesn't mean less money to education, but it matters who's spending the money. We actually know what is the most important thing for an education. It's a great teacher, to your point, and a great teacher has to be adequately compensated and rewarded, and it's an involved community and family. And so instead of having all the money up in Washington, D.C., and people being dictated to about how they spend that money, we ought to push more money into communities, more money into states, and give every parent as many choices as possible, so that every kid has as many chances as possible, whether that's a choice over higher education or a choice as to the teacher in the school that their child can attend, whether it's vouchers or magnets or homeschooling. All of that matters. And I will tell you what, if you give parents choices and you give them accountability and you give communities the opportunity, the teachers that are really good are going to get paid a lot more than the teachers who aren't very good. And over time, that is going to make a difference. The federal government cannot fix this. Yes, ma'am. Can we get rid of the EPA? Well, you know, the EPA, if you look at all the rules that the EPA has rolled out, I know that for some people, whoa, Environmental Protection Agency, it must be a good thing, right? Maybe for young people here, it sounds like a good thing. It's a terrible thing. Not only is the EPA destroying industries in this country, it truly is, but the EPA has rolled out in the last several months something called the Waters of the U.S. The EPA, a federal government agency, now controls 95% of the groundwater in this nation. Do you really think that bureaucrats are going to do a good job controlling and managing water? When I was in Iowa this summer, I took a combine ride. Combines are very cool things, by the way. Very high-tech pieces of machinery. And I was way up in the combine cab, and I'm looking at the computer printout, the computer screen of his soybean fields, and across these nice, neat little rows of soybean were these squiggly blue lines. And I said, what are those? He said, oh, those are waterways. I said, oh, are those the waterways the EPA now controls? He said, yes. I said, I'd like to go see one. So we went and saw one. And it was a round patch of grass about this big. It was a round patch of grass about this big. Somewhere under the grass was moisture. And this is now a waterway controlled by the EPA. This farmer has no idea what to do with this law. And I have seen control of water by the federal government devastate farming in the Central Valley of California, which is why food prices are going up, by the way. But ask yourself this, particularly the students in the room. Ask yourself this, who are these bureaucrats? Who are they? They are elected by no one. They are accountable to no one. They are nameless, they are faceless, there is no consequence. So, President Obama has rolled out a whole set of regulations under executive order. I will roll them back, but we also have to make sure this never happens again. So there's another law sitting on the floor of the House that I'm going to ask your help in passing. It's called the Reins Act. The Reins Act puts Congress in charge. It says, you know what, you can't just roll out regulations because we're no longer a nation of laws. We've become a nation of rules. Rules just roll out, and we don't know who these rule makers are. And most of the rules are rolled out for ideological reasons, not for economic reasons. Their economic impact is crushing. So the Reins Act says Congress has to vote on every single one. As you might expect, this act is sitting on the floor of the House. Nobody's voted on it. I'd like it voted on. So I'm going to ask you to get out your smartphones. Would you like the Reins Act voted on so that your representatives are accountable for the laws that roll out across this nation instead of nameless, faceless bureaucrats? Press 1 for yes, 2 for no. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, that is the last question I have the time to take because I was given a tight time later and maybe all the students have, I don't know, their Monday night to go to. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I just want to close by saying this. This is a very important election. I know we say every election is important, but actually this election is really important. It's important for so many reasons because our debt load is becoming crushing, because the world is such a dangerous place, because I know, having been around bureaucracies all my life, that if you don't get a bureaucracy under control pretty soon, it takes over control. And that is what is going on in Washington, D.C. today. I think this nation must be a place of limitless possibility. for every American, regardless of their circumstances. And we have come to a place in this nation where we don't think we are a place of possibility anymore. That came home to me when I was here in New Hampshire, actually, in the summer of 2014. And I gave a speech, and a man came up to me afterwards. He said, "You know, Carly, we don't think of ourselves as a nation of limitless possibility anymore." And that really hit me. Because we always thought if something were important to do, we would do it. If something were hard to do, we'd figure out how to do it. And we just knew that our children's and our grandchildren's lives, our own lives, were filled with possibilities. And yet we don't feel that way anymore. And when we lose our sense of limitless possibility, we have lost the core of who we are. Every problem we have can be solved. And all of our wounds are self-inflicted, actually. But we need leadership now, and we need to remember what we were intended to be. We were intended to be a citizen government. And I believe now it's time to take our government back. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.